an uncomfortable downtime in a truck. Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to today's report. Today's report was sent in by Safe and Sound, where he took 3.3 grams of mushrooms, cannabis, and tobacco. And here's the full report details. Alright guys, we got another banger from the hound dog Safe and Sound. It's been a long ass time since we covered a report of his, but I think we've covered at least 5 different trip reports of his. Plus he has helped with the artwork early on with the channel, so a big shouts out to bro. But in this report, he tells us of a time where he ended up having a pretty mediocre shroom trip. It wasn't intentional, as he did try to take shrooms 2 days in a row without success. But he tries the third day with low expectations and ends up tripping out with one of his friends in a Walmart parking lot. This shows well just how setting can play a huge role, as I don't think anyone would really want to have a trip like this. You'll see what I mean. I'm sure you'll enjoy this, so without further ado, let's dive right into it. Retrospectively, this trip probably taught a lot more than I give it credit for, mostly because I subconsciously blocked it out of my memory to protect my own identity and ego. At that point, I was totally convinced that I was some sort of psychedelic warrior, a sort of shaman, and that I could practically handle anything a hallucinogen could throw at me. I already had several pleasurable LSD trips, some interesting psilocybin mushroom experiences, and quite a few DXM trips, along with all the other various drugs I had experimented with, such as hydrocodone, obviously marijuana is a given, copious amounts of liquor, Ritalin, and more. I still felt as though I hadn't had a chance to have the deep satori-like profound psychedelic experience that I obsessed about and longed. I'm now set on the conclusion that I've been searching for fulfillment that I couldn't seem to find in my life, but being far too impatient and impractical in my approach. You can't force happiness onto someone, that's for sure, nor can you force yourself to be happy. It was just an average day, with bullshit winter weather, with a light coating of snow all around. Now that I recall, I think it was a Sunday, because I had gotten paid that Friday and bought an eighth of psilocybin mushrooms from someone I never scored drugs from again. That eighth, which I ate that night, did almost nothing to me. It was clear the potency was mediocre. I got mild visuals, but only if I stared at things and waited to see slight distortions. So the next day I got another 5 grams from another one-off shroom dude that I met once and never talked to again. That batch of shrooms was entirely inactive. I ate all 5 grams. Nothing happened for a little over 4 hours, so I gave up and went to bed. Then finally on Sunday, I was texting back and forth with my friend Timmy. He said he had, like almost an eighth of boomers. I told him that was a cool story, but I can't put more money into that shit right now, especially with how crappy the other ones turned out. I told him I basically wasted money already, and can't even rationalize buying mushrooms. He asked me about an old Game Boy Advance Pokemon game that I had, Leaf Green to be exact. We used to play Pokemon on our Game Boys all the time in middle school. He told me he would trade me for the game. Honestly, I still wish I had the game, but I suppose perhaps the experience taught me invaluable lessons. I decided to go through with it and proceeded to make plans for the day. I got my friend Jay to hang out, smoke some bud, and basically waste time with me. That's what we normally did when we hung out. We were great at wasting time and avoiding growing up. A lot of recently graduated guys are probably like that though. I ate the 3.3 grams of dry mushrooms, expecting almost nothing to happen. I had zero expectations. I felt like my lackluster trips in the previous 2 days would make my tolerance too much to really trip. I was in fact completely wrong. When I picked up Jay, we almost immediately decided to go grab some weed. I sent a quick message to my buddy Pork Chop, the ganja peddler, and had a reply just as quickly. Jay decided to wait until later to buy his contribution to the collective bud between the two of us. He said he was going to get it from his new connect later on, after he got a call back from the guy. I seriously doubted this. Like, I'm not a super pessimistic person, more of a realist, but I had known Jay for at least a year at this time, and he was sort of a shitty friend in a few ways. He would lie about paying people back for Buddy borrowed, including me. I never got any gas money from him, even though he promised he would when I gave him rides. I let the debt get ridiculous from being too much of a nice guy to bring it up. So at this point, I was pretty sure he would not even get weed later and that he just wanted to smoke my weed for free. I didn't say anything about it though. We went to one of our usual smoke spots, the parking lot of our local Walmart. I'm sure quite a few people from small towns can relate to this, but where I'm from, Walmart is one of the only places that qualifies as something to do. I'm not sure why exactly, but I've never gotten in trouble or seen anyone else get in trouble for smoking weed there either. We parked in a fairly inconspicuous spot, and I rolled up a blunt. Jay couldn't roll, which is really annoying from any stoner's point of view when someone always relies on others to roll. We sparked up and proceeded to hotbox the hell out of my 2C small cab pickup truck. The amount of smoke that would build up in that small area was unreal, and subjectively, it definitely felt like it got us higher when we would smoke in there. I don't recommend driving on any substance for obvious reasons, but in the past I was more of an idiot, so I did drive several times during this experience. So I'm just lucky it went well enough, I guess. Shortly after smoking, we decided we definitely were going to need something to drink. As our combos continued to dry into more and more uncomfortable levels, I drove us down the road a little to a gas station. On the way there is when I first began to feel the slightest sign of the shrooms taking effect. I was yawning incredibly deep, long, cathartic yawns. They were numerous and incessant. I began to feel different. I wasn't entirely certain if it was the mushrooms, but I definitely knew I felt like something was going on. I had Jay go inside and get both of our drinks, while I sat in my truck and became progressively more engulfed by the psychedelic experience that was unfolding across all my perception. Jay returned shortly, and we both spent a few big gulps for relief. I commented to Jay that I was pretty sure I could feel the come up from the shrooms. He said that he wouldn't want to be around someone who wasn't tripping if he was. This didn't bother me, but as we made our way back to the Walmart parking lot again, I yawned several more times, which apparently bothered Jay quite a bit. At first he said that I should go to bed, then a little later he yelled at me to stop yawning. This still bothers me now just thinking about it. The man knew I was tripping. He had done mushrooms before. I don't think he ever really had a bad trip, but he still knew that hostility isn't taken well in the sensitive and fragile headspace that psychedelics tend to cause. I ignored him and got pretty quiet, only really responding with a few words to him and not talking unless he said something to me. He was irritated by that too, I guess, because he kept complaining he was bored. By this time, I was having undeniable visuals, trails of after images, followed by moving objects. The snow and practically everything seemed brighter and more detailed. The entire landscape had a faint waving effect, similar to the tide of the ocean. I want to say it had been almost 2 hours since I actually consumed the mushrooms. The onset took a little over an hour, which is the longest delay of effects I've experienced from mushrooms. I was absurdly perplexed at the level of fucked up I was. Just after we smoked, I began to dismiss the shrooms, and was under the impression very little, if anything, would happen. I tried to relax and calm down a bit, but was still coming up to the peak, and would be for at least another hour. A whole hour, here in a Walmart parking lot, in broad fucking daylight, crappy winter weather, sitting in a cramped pickup truck next to Jay, who at the time I was totally done with. I couldn't stand how much he was complaining. He showed no empathy whatsoever for me, especially when he talked to me. He said I looked like I was having a bad time, and at first I perceived this was actually concern and compassion. I told him I was really uncomfortable and anxious, and that the trip was getting to be too much to handle. He initially overreacted dramatically and went on a rant about bad trips, and how he didn't think he could help. He dramatically droned on and on about several stories he'd heard from others, and I honestly couldn't comprehend the full narrative of a single one of these tales he told. I just remember that at least 2 or 3 of the details included were blatant myths about psychedelics that I could still notice despite my utter lack of sober thought process. I'm a big believer that shrooms and psychedelics in general are pretty good at enhancing your natural skepticism. I already have a pretty effective bullshit detector and make sure I question the crap that isn't right. He told me I couldn't be tripping that hard because my pupils didn't look dilated. Bear in mind I'm practically in uninterrupted full-on daylight in bright white winter. Of course my eyes won't be extremely dilated. He also said something about how much I was moving around and that it was freaking him out. Mushrooms are known to cause repetitive psychotomimetic movements in people, which I already knew. I'm naturally a fidgety person who has trouble sitting still. I was also uncomfortable, restless, claustrophobic, and anxious stuck in my truck. I was bouncing my knee up and down rapidly by lifting my heel up off the ground and back down. I actually wanted to stop the incessant moving too. My legs were getting sore, and he had just said that he didn't like it. I was able to temporarily be still, but within a minute, I unconsciously was back at it again. Jay's phone rang. I was shocked by the loud, obnoxious tune echoing all around through the tight box that was the truck's cab. I actually jumped in panic and gasped. Jay laughed at me and answered his phone. Come to find out it was Leo, his weed guy. He said that Leo was going to meet us there in a few minutes. Around this time, I had to piss incredibly bad. I sat in horror at the thought of walking through the store in my current state. I thought about how I could possibly see someone that I know and totally embarrass myself, or any worst case scenario along those lines. I became scared I may piss myself if I didn't go in the store. After holding it for almost a half hour, I finally did it. I briskly marched inside, trying not to attract attention or waste time. My peripheral vision seemed more broad and less defined than normal. Subtle trailing blurred around my line of sight. I'm not sure if anyone was actually staring at me or if I was hallucinating this, but I could see the faces of pretty much every single person I walked past. All heads were turned toward me. Thankfully, I was able to get relief of emptying my bladder, and I was a bit more calm while walking back to the truck. I actually had a chance to enjoy the trip for a few minutes when first getting back into the truck. I was more relaxed now and felt like I would be alright. I stared out the window at the snow that was covering the field beside the parking lot. The snow had a breathing rhythm and unreal levels of detail to accompany it. I stared intently until I began to feel or think that there was little entities burrowing around in the snow. Then I actually saw the small dwarven elves scurrying about the surface. They moved like clockwork, mechanically rotating in a pattern repeatedly. Initially, I was stupefied at this. Then I began to awkwardly laugh with a seething sort of sound, sort of like a mix of the laugh people have when they're trying to be quiet and only air comes out of their mouth, plus the ho ho, ha, ho ho, of an uncomfortable but natural chuckle. Jay asked what I was doing, so I told him I could see the munchkins praying in the snow, and he was completely bewildered by this. I grew anxious and restless again shortly after. We waited at least another hour or so on this stupid weed guy to get here, but to me, it felt like hundreds of consecutive moments of eternity. Time lost meaning. I felt as though reality consisted of just my immediate surroundings. Like the physical nature of the universe was dependent on the work of the munchkins, as if there was no boundaries between consciousness and the physical world, and like I was stuck there forever helplessly without any hope. I slipped into really dark thoughts, vaguely contemplating my own death, possibly on my own hands. I resisted these ideas and repeatedly cycled back to them. Around this time, the visuals were toning down slightly, but my mental state veered closer to drug-induced psychosis. When Leo finally decided to roll into the parking lot, I had to drive around and park closer to him for some reason, instead of him just coming closer to us, like any logical delivery dude should do. His car was still out of sight from where I parked, however. Jay hopped out and walked over to retrieve his trees. I'm not sure at all how long he was actually gone, because my perception of time was as wonky as a magical chocolate factory. Nevertheless, I started to delude myself into believing that my state of intoxication had scared off Jay, so we simply lied and had Leo to pick him up to rescue him from me. I was surprised and a little disappointed when I turned out to be wrong about this. He returned and immediately was eager to get fried again. I had no intention of smoking. In fact, I felt like I was ready for bed. But after he begged and fiended out about it, I eventually rolled up a fat-ass finger-sized 2-rat-thick cannon of a blunt and waited while he smoked. I didn't want to intensify the trip by adding weed to it again, but I almost definitely caught some sort of contact as the cannabis saturated the air, lingering around in the truck. Soon I convinced Jay to part ways for the day, but I was going to have to drive across town to drop him off to our buddy Caden. It was snowing ever so slightly, But as a result of visual drifting from the shrooms, I was terrified the whole drive there. It was only 10 minutes or so, but easily felt close to an hour. I could hardly see the lines on the road. I'm very fortunate that I'm alright. Once I finally ridded myself of my annoying pal, I decided to smoke some cigarettes from a little convenience store. I had an awkward exchange talking to the cashier, who was possibly hard of hearing or something, because she kept saying, "What?" I began to panic, thinking that I wasn't speaking properly. Thankfully, I was able to get my cancer sticks and dip out of that situation. I slowly came the rest of the way down within the hour. I wouldn't choose to go through that again, but I can't say I completely regret it either. I do want to tell everyone to actually think about set and setting, and the people we are around. Don't be a dumbass like me.